In the early hours of May 8, 1902, the island of Martinique was calm. The sun was rising, fishermen were preparing for a day on the Caribbean Sea, and the people of Saint-Pierre were just beginning their morning routines. A city of 30,000 people, vibrant and cultured, Saint-Pierre was the gem of the French colonial Caribbean. It had theaters, electric lights, and a tram system. People called it the Paris of the West Indies, but that morning, in the space of just 1 minute, Saint-Pierre ceased to exist. At exactly 7:52 a.m., a mountain above the city split open. In that instant, the sky turned to fire. A wall of superheated gas, ash, and pulverized stone burst from the volcano's side and raced down the slope at hundreds of miles per hour. In less than 60 seconds, every soul in Saint-Pierre, man, woman, and child, was dead. This is the story of Mount Pelée. The eruption that didn't just destroy a city, it erased it. A disaster so sudden, so absolute, it left behind almost nothing. No time to flee. No time to scream. Just a flash of fire and the quiet that followed. And at the center of it all, a volcano that gave every warning, and a society that chose not to listen. Mount Pelée had always been there, watching from the north end of Martinique. Towering, beautiful, and quiet. For most of its existence, it had been seen more as a backdrop than a threat. The people of Saint-Pierre lived in its shadow, unaware that the mountain was storing centuries of rage beneath its green slopes. It wasn't entirely silent. There had been minor eruptions in the 18th and 19th centuries, but none caused damage. Locals had grown used to its slumber, forgetting that even the calmest volcanoes can awaken in fury. The first signs of unrest came in April 1902. It started with rumblings, distant thunder-like sounds echoing from the mountain's core. A faint smell of sulfur clung to the breeze. Soon after, fine ash began falling over the city like gray snow. Gardens were dusted. Rooftops turned the color of coal. Birds flew erratically, and snakes, disturbed from their mountain homes, slithered into nearby villages in terrifying numbers. Some villagers were bitten in their sleep by venomous fer-de-lances, the island's most feared predator. Still, most people stayed. On April 25, Mount Pelée erupted with a plume of dark smoke. Lava didn't flow, but ash and steam belched skyward in bursts. Panic began to rise, but local officials, including the governor, quickly moved to calm the public. Scientists sent to examine the volcano insisted it was just a mild phreatic event, steam-driven, unlikely to escalate. The newspapers agreed. Some even mocked the fear as overreaction. The people were told they were safe. They believed it. But the volcano didn't stop. Ashfall intensified. Boiling mudslides raced down the rivers, burying plantations and animals. Fissures opened in the earth. The roar from the crater grew louder each day, a low grumble that vibrated through the island like the sound of distant artillery. The animals heard it best, livestock fled from their pens, and forest creatures vanished. But the humans stayed. There was another reason for this blind confidence: politics. It was election season in Martinique. Officials feared that evacuating Saint-Pierre, the island's largest city, would be seen as weakness and spark unnecessary chaos. The colonial governor, Louis Moutet, went so far as to travel to the city himself to demonstrate his trust in the experts. With him came his wife and several government officials. They would die with the rest. On May 5, 3 days before the disaster, a massive explosion rocked Mount Pelée. A boiling black cloud surged into the sky. Ash blanketed the city, turning day into night. Ships in the harbor caught fire from falling cinders. Horses collapsed in the streets. And yet, no evacuation order came. Even then, with the mountain literally glowing above them, the people stayed. What else could they do? The government insisted the danger had passed. Religious leaders said it was divine punishment, but also that faithful citizens need not worry. Many people simply didn't have the means to flee. The roads were impassable. The harbor was congested. For the residents of Saint-Pierre, the choice was to wait and hope. And then came May 8. At 7:52 a.m., the side of Mount Pelée exploded. Not upward, like many expected, but sideways, directly at Saint-Pierre. What surged from the mountain wasn't lava, but a pyroclastic surge, a high-speed avalanche of gas, ash, and shattered rock, superheated to over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. It moved faster than sound, nearly 400 miles per hour. There was no time to run. No time to pray. No warning. In one terrifying moment, the entire city was engulfed. People were vaporized in an instant. Buildings collapsed under the weight of ash and fire. Entire blocks vanished. Ships in the harbor ignited simultaneously. Glass liquefied in shop windows. Metal twisted like wax. The temperature was so high that some bodies were carbonized where they stood, frozen in place like charcoal statues. The lucky ones never knew what hit them. The unlucky ones were burned alive. In less than 60 seconds, Saint-Pierre was silent. Rescue teams who arrived later found a landscape that resembled the surface of the moon. Ash lay 10 feet deep. The city's famous theater, its cathedral, its grand hotels, all reduced to blackened skeletons. There were no cries for help. No survivors to speak of. Just the smell of sulfur and death. Except for one man. In a stone jail cell, deep below the ruins, a man named Ludger Silberus clung to life. He'd been locked up the night before for drunken disorderly conduct. His cell had no windows, just a narrow slot in the iron door. When the pyroclastic flow struck, the heat blasted through that slot, searing his body. But the stone walls insulated him from the full force. He was knocked unconscious but didn't die. When rescuers heard his moans 4 days later, they dug him out. His body was covered in burns. His lungs were scorched. He couldn't speak. But he was alive. Ludger Silberus became a sensation. The man who survived the apocalypse. He would later tour with Barnum and Bailey's circus, telling his story to stunned audiences. A living reminder of nature's wrath and mankind's fragility. There was another survivor, less well known. Léon Compère Leandre, a shoemaker, lived on the city's edge. When the eruption hit, he was blown through a wall by the blast. He awoke, disoriented and burned, but managed to flee toward the sea. He never told his story on stage. He simply rebuilt his life and moved on. For the rest of the world, news of Saint-Pierre's destruction spread like wildfire. Telegrams carried the story, entire city destroyed, no survivors. People struggled to comprehend the scale. One moment, a bustling city. The next, nothing. Mount Pelée continued to erupt for months. Secondary blasts, lava domes, and further pyroclastic flows continued to threaten what remained of northern Martinique. But there was nothing left to destroy. Saint-Pierre was gone. The death toll, over 30,000 people. It remains the deadliest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. What makes this story so haunting isn't just the scale of destruction, it's how many people could have been saved. Scientists today believe the signs were clear. The ash. The gas. The rumbling. Even the snakes. But political hesitation, poor communication, and public trust in flawed reassurances led an entire city to its end. In the aftermath, volcanology changed forever. Researchers coined a new term, a Pelée eruption. It described the lateral, pressure-driven blasts like the one at Mount Pelée. Unlike the iconic cone-shaped eruptions of Mount Fuji or Mount St. Helens, Pelée eruptions are silent killers. They don't roar. They hiss. They wait. And then they strike sideways with unthinkable speed. Today, the ruins of Saint-Pierre remain. A preserved skeleton of a city, where tourists walk among the stones and try to imagine the lives lost in that single minute. A theater facade still stands. The jail cell that saved Silberus has been reinforced and turned into a monument. The mountain itself still looms, quiet for now, but never forgotten. And scientists watch it, constantly. Modern sensors monitor temperature, gas levels, seismic activity. Emergency plans exist. There are drills. Escape routes. Sirens. But even now, people live at the volcano's base. They farm the land. They raise children. They trust that history will not repeat itself. That when Pelée speaks again, the world will listen. It's easy to believe that in a modern age, we'd act differently. That we'd heed the warnings. But history shows us otherwise. Time and time again, human confidence, economic interests, and political agendas override caution. We wait too long. We assume nature will play by our rules. Saint-Pierre teaches us otherwise. Because the truth is, Mount Pelée didn't hide what it was going to do. It whispered its warning in ash and sulfur. It roared through rivers and shook the ground. It sent animals fleeing. It tried to speak. And we refused to hear it. The tragedy of Saint-Pierre wasn't just that it was destroyed. It was that it never had to be. As you hear this now, take a moment to imagine it. You wake up on a warm Caribbean morning. Maybe you're having coffee. Maybe you're walking to work. The sky is hazy, but that's been happening for weeks. You trust the world around you. You feel safe. Then, in the time it takes to blink, everything is gone. No alarms. No escape. Just fire and silence. This is not a legend. This is not myth. This happened. And it could happen again, anywhere. Any mountain, any island, any sleeping giant waiting beneath the soil. Because nature doesn't owe us mercy. And sometimes, when it finally speaks, it's already too late. If you found this story chilling, you're not alone. These are the tales we share here on Lore of the Multiverse, real events, lost to time, brought back so we can remember. Like, subscribe, and ask yourself one question before the next video. What if you're standing in a place right now that history won't forgive?